Welcome to Lecture 27 of Origins of Art. At the beginning of the term, we saw that before our ancestors made aesthetic artifacts, they made utilitarian artifacts, that is, tools. In this lecture, we're going to take another look at early stone tools and reconsider the possibility that they have an aesthetic function. In the article assigned for this lecture, Mythen argues that Acheulean hand axes were the first artifacts created with an aesthetic quality. In other words, that they're the earliest aesthetic artifacts. He begins by comparing them to Oldowan tools. He doesn't mention Lamequian tools because when his article was published in 2003, they hadn't been discovered yet. He points out that Oldowan tools, which were associated with Homo habilis, have very little aesthetic appeal and lack intentionally imposed design. There's no attempt to modify the original shape of the rock other than to create a cutting edge. In contrast, Acheulean tools have a deliberately imposed form. This becomes apparent when you compare one hand axe to another and see that they all have a similar design. They're all bifacially napped, that is, flakes have been removed from both sides of the axe. They tend to have a teardrop shape, and they're often symmetrical. Hand axes have been found in Africa, Asia, and Europe, and were used for over 1 million years. Thus, they were used by several different hominid species, including Homo ergaster, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, and Neanderthals. Mythen argues that hand axes have strong aesthetic appeal due to their symmetry. Some of this symmetry is a byproduct of the bifacial napping process used in their production, but in some cases additional symmetry appears to have been imposed by carefully removing flakes so that the axe is symmetrical in 3 dimensions: in plan, that is, from overhead, in profile, that is, from the side, and in cross-section. Another way in which these artifacts have been made aesthetically appealing is through the use of distinctive and high-quality raw materials, as seen in the photo. In still other cases, fossils have been left intact in the stone used to make the axe. Mythen notes that these aesthetic modifications take time and effort, yet they add no functional benefit to the artifact in terms of its effectiveness as a tool. It seems unlikely, then, that the painstaking removal of small flakes to make exquisitely symmetrical hand axes was done for utilitarian purposes. Mythen also notes that the cost of acquiring raw materials for hand axes was probably highly variable, depending on the local environment and mobility patterns. Thus, in some cases, raw material acquisition may have been the most costly part of the manufacturing process. This raises the question, why did early humans spend time and energy acquiring beautiful raw materials and crafting finely symmetrical hand axes for tasks that didn't require it? The answer, Mythen argues, is that extremely well-crafted hand axes were a form of costly signaling used in the context of courtship display. In other words, Mythen offers the same explanation for highly symmetrical hand axes that Miller offers for art and other cultural behaviors. Mythen argues that the symmetry of a hand axe was a reliable indicator of the fitness of the individual who made it, because like a peacock's tail, it's costly to produce and thus difficult to fake. Making an extremely symmetrical hand axe takes a lot of time and energy, just like growing and maintaining a large tail. An individual who can't spare the time and energy can't produce the signal. Thus, just as the peacock's tail is a reliable indicator of the animal's ability to fight off parasites, acquire a nutritious diet, and escape from predators, the manufacture of a fine symmetrical hand axe might have been a reliable indicator of the individual's ability to secure food and shelter, escape from predators, and compete successfully in the social group. These abilities have a genetic component and would have been inherited by offspring. Thus, individuals who were able to make extremely symmetrical hand axes might have been preferentially chosen as mates. In support of his argument, Mythen points to the wide variation in hand axe quality. Some are highly symmetrical, while others are asymmetrical and lack continuous flaking across the surface. This indicates that there was variation in the ability to produce highly symmetrical hand axes. That is, that some individuals were more skilled at making them than others. Mythen also notes that Acheulean sites are often characterized by an abundance of hand axes, many of which are in pristine condition, suggesting that they weren't used or weren't used much. This is really puzzling. Why would people have spent time making new axes when plenty of axes were already available? Mythen's answer, in a word, is cheating. A person could avoid the cost of making a high-quality hand axe by stealing, borrowing, or finding a discarded one. In this way, a person could acquire a hand axe of a quality that was far beyond his or her abilities, and fool people into thinking that he or she had made it. In order to signal ability to make highly symmetrical hand axes, then, an individual would have to be seen making one. Thus, Mythen argues, it was the making of a hand axe rather than the hand axe itself that was important. Possession of a high-quality hand axe would not be a reliable indicator of a person's abilities, but observing someone making a high-quality hand axe would be. Once a hand axe was made, its job was done, and it was discarded. Mythen therefore sees the abundance of hand axes as evidence that they were made for aesthetic rather than utilitarian purposes. Mythen argues that hand axes acted as reliable indicators for 4 dimensions of fitness: resource location abilities, planning ability, good health, and ability to monitor other individuals in the group. Hand axes indicated knowledge of resource distribution because high-quality hand axes require high-quality stone, and high-quality stone must be located and extracted. Thus, the ability to make fine hand axes indicates possession of valuable environmental knowledge, namely the distribution of raw materials across the landscape. A person who knows where to get high-quality stone is also likely to know where other high-quality resources are located, such as plants, carcasses, game, shelter, and water. This ability to understand and exploit the environment effectively would have been very attractive in a mate. Hand axes were also reliable indicators of the mental capacities required to produce them, such as the ability to conceive and successfully execute a plan. As we saw at the beginning of the course, tool manufacture requires sequencing, the ability to envision the steps you have to take in order to make a tool, and the ability to assemble the components of the tool in the right order. Highly symmetrical hand axes thus require the ability to plan, and also to modify that plan as contingencies arise, for example, unexpected flaws in the raw material or missed strikes. In other words, tool manufacture requires the ability to innovate, that is, to improvise a new plan on the spot. Finally, making high-quality hand axes requires persistence and determination. Hand axe manufacture was thus an indicator of the maker's behavioral disposition and temperament. These capacities and qualities, sequencing, inventiveness, and determination, are valuable in other spheres of activity, such as finding food, constructing a shelter, and building alliances and friendships. Thus, these qualities would have been highly valued in a mate. Mythen argues that high-quality hand axes are also an indicator of good health. This is because strength is required for the removal of thinning flakes, and good eyesight and hand-eye coordination are essential throughout the manufacturing process. Thus, poor napping results would be an effective indicator of illness or physical decline. And finally, Mythen argues that high-quality hand axes are an indicator of good social skills. This is because you have to pay close attention to what you're doing when you're making a stone tool, so that you don't get cut, so that sharp flakes don't go flying everywhere and get in your eye, and so that you don't strike your hand with the hammerstone by accident. This means that it's hard to pay attention to other things going on around you, such as what other people in your band are up to. As we've seen, humans make their living largely by cooperating with others. Humans depend on each other for food, health care, defense, information, and labor. To cooperate, we have to infer what others want, believe, and/or plan to do. In other words, cooperation requires theory of mind. Theory of mind, remember, is the ability to make inferences about other people's mental states based on their behavior, body language, facial expressions, words, and the context in which these occur, as well as the ability to use this knowledge to predict others' behavior. To do all this, we have to monitor the behavior of others, but this is hard to do when you're concentrating on making a high-quality tool. So, a person who is successful at making finely crafted hand axes and at navigating their social environment must have had excellent social monitoring skills. Mythen also notes that finely crafted hand axes exploit perceptual biases for symmetry. As we saw earlier in the course, our visual system is designed to be sensitive to patterns with a vertical axis of symmetry. This bias serves at least 2 functions. First, it's useful for agency detection, because the only naturally occurring entities in the world with vertical symmetry are agents. An agent is any entity capable of goal-directed action. That is, any entity capable of having goals and capable of self-locomotion so that it can act to attain those goals. In other words, agents are animals, including humans. It's important to be able to detect agents because an agent might have the goal of harming you, as in the case of predators or hostile humans, or it may have the goal of avoiding you, as in the case of game animals, or it may have the goal of helping you, as in the case of friends or allies. Thus, a perceptual bias toward symmetry would have acted as an alarm indicating the presence of an agent. Secondly, as we saw when we talked about the human form and fluctuating asymmetry, perceptual biases for symmetry are also instrumental in mate choice. This is because the presence of harmful genetic mutations, pathogens, or stress during development can lead to asymmetries in bilateral body features, such as ears, eyes, arms, and legs. Thus, the degree of symmetry that a body or body part exhibits is a good indicator of genetic and physical health. If Mythen is correct, then Handaxes are the earliest known aesthetic artifacts. Acheulean Handaxes first appear in the archaeological record around 1.5 million years ago. This is long before the earliest evidence of mark making, which is the engraved shell found in Java and dated to between 540 and 430,000 years ago. It's also long before the earliest evidence of ochre use, between 400 and 300,000 years ago, and the earliest evidence of cupule petroglyphs, around 300,000 years ago. But, as with these other artifacts, it's hard to say whether they're evidence of art behavior. Many of the highly symmetrical Handaxes are in pristine condition, which is a strong indication that they were not used for utilitarian purposes, such as chopping, cutting, or hunting. And they appear to meet our working definition of art, which is the use of line, color, pattern, and/or form by humans to modify an object or body solely to attract attention to that object or body. Both form, in this case extreme symmetry, and color, in the choice of distinctive, eye-catching raw materials, appear to have been deliberately used to make the Handaxes more attention-getting. They also meet Miller's criteria of virtuosity and creativity. Making a high-quality Handaxe requires skill, and using unusual materials shows creativity. They even fit Dissanayaka's definition of making the ordinary extraordinary. In this case, the ordinary object is an everyday tool, and it's been made special through the use of elaboration and exaggeration. This raises the question, is there more to art than this? And if so, what's missing from the definitions we've looked at so far? We'll take up this question next week. This concludes Lecture 27.